I'm Mike Costello, and I'm here with Dr. Freelander, and today we'd like to talk to you about the courage of being free. In Metaphysical New Thought, we talk a lot about the fact that we live in our minds and not in the world. And it is really a distinction of courage to be free, at least from a mental standpoint, isn't it, Iris?
Yes, indeed, it is, Mike. And it's a courage that we can all garner for our own use, and then we inspire others. And it's like the herd instinct when one person is strong or one person is weak and saying things they should not say or things that's inspiring, then it affects everyone. And it's a very wonderful thing to know that others are dependent on us, and it's not a small thing.
Mm-hmm. The courage to be free really begins in our way of thinking, doesn't it? I know in our counseling work and at the church, so often people think that freedom has to do with having enough money or having life go the way we want it to go. But in fact, those are byproducts of our mental and spiritual aspects of freedom, aren't they?
Yes, of course they are. And also free will would enter in there. God gave mankind free will. And a lot of, excuse me, I've heard so many people say, well, I'm going to use my free will, but we need to look to see how exactly we're using that free will, because very often we mess things up terribly when if we just let go and let God, then our free will wouldn't get us into the trouble that it often does.
Mm-hmm. So often we believe that circumstance or situation has a lot to do with, with every aspect of our being. And a lot of times people will say, well, it's the background that I came from, or my lack of education, or my job, or my family, or different things that restrict us. And it is really a discipline to build a consciousness of being free. And it really goes to the heart of this issue of free will that you mentioned just a moment ago, to take responsibility for one's own life. And so often it's easier to say, well, the circumstances caused me to have to live this way, or the circumstances limit me in some way. And that takes away, that shows, or actually demonstrates a lack of courage, doesn't it?
Yes, it does, because true courage is when we have some people call it the courage of our convictions, that we know we know all the ramifications of a decision, and yet we have the courage to say whatever we know to be truth, but not so that it hurts someone else, and not so that it creates a problem, but just so that truth is manifested in our lives. And if we just stay strong in our own right and say what we know to be true, then we're really highly respected, even by those people who wish we would say something else, because truth is always stronger, and there's great strength that we gain and that others gain when we stick to truth.
Mm-hmm. But that means that we have to take some personal responsibility for ourselves and for our lives. And so often that's the problem, at least I find, in dealing with those around us, who, especially those who come to us with problems and difficulties in life, is the reluctance to take responsibility, the reluctance to have the courage to exercise free will, and to understand that that freedom and that free thought allows the alternatives and the choices that we make to be many and varied. And we always have so many choices, despite what we believe in circumstance and situation. So often people will come to us and they'll say, well, I have to work in this job. Well, in fact, we know they don't have to work in that job. But to take the courage and to be courageous enough to understand that maybe that's not the job to have. Mm-hmm. Now, that doesn't mean that if an individual's in a particular job that they don't like, that they just quit their job and wait for something else to come along. But it does mean that they have the courage to make a change, and the courage to make those changes is really the basis of the courage that sets us free and that allows us to be free.
Yes, now that is the main point, isn't it? That's the underlying factor. And when we have that courage and exercise it, again, we benefit and all the people around us benefit. And we can look back on circumstances in our own lives where people were not really happy at all with our actions, but later they would applaud that we would have the courage to do that, or not we, but whoever would have that courage. And so again, life is a series of choices, and we make the choice that's most honest and most truthful. And it does take courage to do that. But when we do, again, we're more highly respected, aren't we, by others than if we take the easy way out.
Absolutely. And we need to cultivate that courage to be free from circumstances and to be free from our belief that the circumstances of life determine the quality of our life, because we can always change the circumstances as we change our thought patterns, as we change our behavior, and as we change our life directions. And sometimes, not sometimes, most of the time, that takes a lot of personal work, it takes a lot of spiritual work, and it takes commitment and belief in oneself. And so often in New Thought, we get faulted by people who don't really understand our philosophy, because they'll talk about the fact that we're really negating the presence and the power of God or the divine. And we don't do that at all, because we do believe that the divine gives us both the courage and the freedom to change our circumstances and situations, gives us the strength to be proactive and to redirect our lives so that we don't sit and wring our hands and talk about, isn't it awful, and I'm just in this situation and totally helpless. In fact, we're never helpless.
That's right, we never are. And we have the choice to do as we please. I was just remembering something that happened when I was a child, when I was very, very young. And there was a young lady, my age level, who was deformed. Her body was grossly deformed, and her face, too, was deformed, and she couldn't speak very well. And I know my sisters and I would be especially kind to her. And one time, a lady we'd never seen before said to the sister of that young girl with the problem, asked whose child she was. And the sisters said, well, I don't know. I just happened to be here when she is. And my sisters and I were just appalled that she would deny that that was her sister, and it was beyond our comprehension. And we were not exactly critical of her. It was just like something you don't understand. And I hadn't thought of that until last Sunday. I was at the park with a family, a large group of people, and there was a child there who's 3 years old who was with our group, and he has problems because he was born at 6 months of age, not even 7 months. And so that child has severe problems. And I told the parents, I want to take him over to the swings and just play with him. So we were gone for about an hour, and he was playing, and he can't control his hands and his head and his parts of his body at times. But it was so lovely just being able to let that child be normal in the climbing and so forth. And his father came over after a moment and said, well, certain things there make me nervous. I was letting him climb anything he wanted to. I just undergirded him wherever he was. And there was one place I wouldn't let him go because it was open. But anything else I let him do as he pleased, which I think was a really good idea. But in any event, then later on I was thinking of what happened when I was a child, because I was remembering when I was with that child for that hour, no one looked at us askance or as if he was unusual at all. And I thought at the time, humanity has come a long way. And I think that's true, don't you? That humanity has come a long way. And that might be a good example to show how we have.
We've come a long way, and we've come a long way in understanding that the circumstances and situations, just like the circumstance that that young child in your childhood experienced, and then this young child in this current day, how the difference in perception and thought has changed in the world around, but also within the individuals. But then, of course, we can also go back far into history and see people who have had tremendous disabilities, and yet they have had the courage to be free beyond the limitation of their disabilities. And when we see that, and we see that demonstration of courage and ability to be free of circumstance and situation, it gives great hope for the little things that we have in life, where we really need to be free from the appearances of limitation. And that's a reality, because So often we see these things as limitations, when in fact it is the appearance of limitation.
Yeah.
And we've seen over and over again, both in the physical and in the mental aspects of life and in the spiritual aspects of life, people who are able to overcome great adversity because they have the courage to be free from the appearance, free from the seeming outward experience of life, and see the strength of who and what they are as perfect and whole children of God with limitless potential and with the ability to do great and wonderful things despite appearances.
Yes, and one more or less in our own time would be Helen Keller. That's a wonderful challenge that she faced in such a wonderful way. And her courage to take her through the adversity that she faced was almost unthinkable, but still it wasn't. It wasn't unthinkable at all. It's what she did.
And then think of the simple adversities that we all have,
Yes.
the difficulties of balancing the checkbook and paying the rent and keeping our jobs or changing our jobs or losing our jobs and having relationships end and all of those kinds of challenges. And of course, that's what our faith tradition is all about, showing people how they can deal with these difficulties, adversities, and challenges and not only see beyond them and not only go through them, but grow through them
Yeah.
because of the courage that they have, that all of us have. And the other thing that I think is important for us to share is that this is nothing that's unique to us or to our faith tradition. Everyone can demonstrate these principles if they would choose to do so.
Yes, they can, and so often do. And isn't it a wonderful thing that that everyone, most everyone, meets the challenges of life in a courageous and wonderful way, and it's an inspiration when we see people not whine and not act as if they're a martyr, but just to carry on. And it happens more often than not, and we can applaud those people. But the people who do manage to carry on are the ones who see that they have options, aren't they? They see they have options and they follow the one that's most logical to them. And so this is when people lose hope, that is the most terrible thing to me that can ever happen to anyone, because there's always hope available. God never gives us, like the old cliche, he doesn't close the door, that he doesn't open a window or something like that. But there's always something available that we can do, and we can do it with courage and dignity too.
Absolutely, and that dignity of life permeates every aspect of what we're discussing today, so that no matter what the challenge or difficulty, whether it's a physical imperfection that we have, whether it's a disease that we're facing, whether it's a relationship that's ending, all of those things, we can have the courage to not only face them, but to be free to trust ourselves to make the right choices and to deal with each of those circumstances, and to know that as we do that, we don't detract from the presence and power of God or the divine, but we don't throw it over on God's shoulders either. So many people will say very glibly, it's the will of God, and that all of these negative experiences or circumstances, well, it's God's will. And it's a way to not have courage and a way not to be free, because we know that God's will for us is good and only good, and that we have the responsibility always, the God-given responsibility, to take upon ourselves making right choices and having right thoughts so that we can deal with whatever the adversity is. And that's the true freedom that we have. And it comes from our mind, it comes from our way of thinking, and it comes from sharing with those around us the demonstration of this truth and reality despite the appearances of situations.
Yes, and our belief system is our own unique undergirding. And when our belief system encompasses that factor of never giving up, of knowing that God is always there for us, but not expecting God to do it for us, but just knowing that God is always there for us, then we can then have the courage to be free. But I don't know how anyone without some spiritual belief could ever manage to live in this world, because how could they?
It's a great challenge, and of course, many people try, but of course, we know and we talk a lot about the connection of mind, body, spirit, and the importance of balancing those three aspects of being. And in the second half of the program, we'll talk a little bit more about that. We'd like to pause at this point and offer you the opportunity to receive some literature so that you can continue to study the ideas and concepts that we're sharing with you today.
like to offer you the opportunity to receive one of these free booklets to further your understanding of the New Thought message of confident living. Each month, we will feature a different booklet, which will be mailed to you free and postage paid. Simply address your request to Confident Living at P.O. Box 7726, Long Beach, California, 90807.
It does take some courage and the cultivation of courage to be able to understand and claim our own freedom, doesn't it?
Yes, it does. And that courage does not encompass stepping over others, stepping on others, and using their bodies to get over them to get what we want. It's the courage to accept graciously what life hands us, and then to react in ways that don't hurt others and ways that don't hurt ourselves too, because there's always answers to every problem. It's just that sometimes we don't see all the various options. So as we do see them and then work with integrity and courage, then we're not hurting others deliberately. And if we are, then we let them know that we're sorry that we are, if it's totally impossible to avoid that. But that's the true freedom, isn't it? The true freedom is in not hurting others to get what we want and need, but know what we want and need and accomplish that.
Absolutely, so well said. And also to give up judgment and blame.
Exactly.
You know, so often we judge and we blame. And of course, as you and I do a lot of counseling, and in relationship difficulties, the greatest problem is judgment and blame. And then the same is true when we are faced with adversity or difficulty. A lot of people want to know why, and they want to judge. But the fact is that we really need to give up this need to both judge the circumstance or the person, or to blame the circumstance or the person in any instance. And what we need to do is look at ourselves. And that's always a hard thing to do, because when we're faced with limitation or challenge, we so often want to look at the problem, and we want to blame the problem, and we want to judge, to give judgment to something other than ourselves. But one of the things that we say often in our belief system is that many of the things that we experience in our lives are attracted to us because of our way of thinking and because of our behavior. And now and I want to qualify that by saying that's not true of everything, but it is true of many things, and many of the negative things. And that in and of itself is a judgment. And so we need to step out of the ability of or the process of mind and heart and emotion, where we try to reason what brought us to this point, and instead begin to look at ourselves and look at whether or not we have the courage to be and demonstrate freedom and the integrity that we've been discussing in this circumstance, and then to be guided and directed in the way that we should go. Earlier in the program, you used that very famous quote that we hear so often, let go and let God. And we always use that as well, and we complete it by saying, let go and let God guide me and direct me in the way that I should go. Because it is in that guidance and direction that we find the solutions to our problems. And it's in letting go of the blame and the judgment of why this happened, or talking about where I came from, or what I didn't have, or what I didn't do. And of course, there are times when we need to go back and we need to acknowledge our own failures, and we need to acknowledge those to ourselves and sometimes to others. And we need always to protect ourselves from harming others, just as you said so well. But we need to come back again and again to the fact that both courage and the courage to be free come from inside us. And then those become empowering virtues that are demonstrated in our lives and make us the joyful, positive, empowering persons that we need to be. And it doesn't mean that everything's going to be wonderful and rosy, because there are going to be difficulties in time and in our lives, and we talk a lot about that. It's okay and it's fine. It's good to feel the way that we feel, but it's not good to feel negatively and to stay in those negative places. If you hurt, you're hurt. If you're sick, you're sick. Everyone's heard me say that over and over again. But once we find ourselves in those places, we decide this is not where I want to be. And now we let go and let God guide us and direct us in the way that we should go. And we begin to work within ourselves, and we begin our own personal pilgrimage in this trek to demonstrate courage, and the courage to be free to make right choices and right decisions about the circumstance without judgment, without blame, without stepping on people, without hurting people, and without drawing upon all of the isn't it awfuls of the past.
Yes, and when you talk about not being judgmental, we really need to give close attention to that facet when we're facing a problem with others. And because it's when we have something that, a situation that seems so clear cut to one person, it might not be that same clear cut to others. And it might be very clear cut to the other person, but it's totally different viewpoints. And it's not that one person is trying to put something over on another or trying to do something mean to another person. Their perception is so totally different that they don't think they're doing wrong. When the second person looking at it might say, yes, this is terribly wrong. So we need to look from the other person's viewpoint and see where they're coming from. And I'm thinking of something in my own life that happened fairly recently. And it happened that someone did something that seemed so totally out of keeping with the way they normally acted toward their friends. And then when I looked at it closely, I couldn't see where they were coming from, but I didn't get upset. And I just said, I don't understand your thinking. And I think that if we do stay calm, then we're having the courage to be free because we're staying calm and not getting caught up in the drama of a situation. And then the whole thing was settled very amicably and in a very lovely way. And so without saying a long story about that, the bottom line is, if we look at another person's viewpoint and see that they have a viewpoint that we can't understand, we're not seeing it, but it's valid to them, and then try and see where they're coming from. And that would avoid a lot of court cases, it would avoid a lot of problems, it would avoid a lot of dissonance in life, wouldn't it?
Absolutely, and it would avoid a lot of frustrations and a lot of hurt feelings.
Yes.
And it would also begin the process. And it's very important that all of the things that you talked about were happening, or the counsel you were giving was happening within the person.
Yeah.
They weren't going out and telling the other person. You know, we so often want to go out and tell the other person,
Yeah.
oh, you did this, or you did that, or you're wrong. And we do that with our children, and we do that with our teens so often, is to tell them what they've done wrong and to make those judgments about them. And certainly there are times we need to guide children and young people, but we need to validate people, and we need to allow them to behave in the way that they're behaving without this issue of judgment, again, if no one is being harmed necessarily. And it's tremendously important for us to say, and a technique that I use a lot and invite people to use is when people misbehave or behave in a cavalier or strange or bizarre fashion, to say, isn't that interesting? You know, as opposed to the judgment of it. Well, if we begin, well, isn't that interesting that they're behaving that way? And then, isn't it interesting that I'm responding in the way that I'm responding? Why am I responding in this way? And let's start working on ourselves before we start working on the other people, because we need to get right with ourselves, and we need to center ourselves, and we need to be in a peaceful place where we can be rational and begin to move through the healing process and the empowering process of ourselves before we go out trying to heal other people. You know, most of us want to heal everyone else before we heal ourselves.
Yes, but we can look within ourselves and see where we're coming from, and then we can usually see where the other person is coming from. And true freedom is freedom to express ourselves without hurting the other person, and without being, as you said earlier, without being judgmental. And if we really exercise our true freedom, then we're following in the steps of that great way shower, the Lord Christ, or the way shower for whatever religion of any religion. There are always those to whom we can look for guidance. But as we look for guidance, we need to not just acknowledge that that's what they would do, but actually do that ourselves. And then it creates a wholly different circumstance from which to work, doesn't it?
Absolutely. And of course, in our movement, we talk about our human mind or our conscious mind connecting with divine mind. And that union with the divine is so much a part of what we talk about and what we teach and what we use in our counseling, because we think that if we can do that, then we have the courage to be free. We let go of judgment. We let go of blame. We would never hurt or harm anyone else. We don't begin to question other people, and we look at ourselves as expressions of the divine, connected with the divine. And it always, and you said it so well, and we say it over and over in this program, has profound respect for every faith tradition. And unfortunately, so many faith traditions are about the business of convincing people why they're right and everyone else is wrong. And we don't spend any time on that at all.
Never.
Because every faith has validity and every person's faith has value. And so the importance is that we use our faith and that we accept our faith and that we accept it as an empowering and strengthening force, and that we believe that this divine union with us happens, and when that happens, great and wonderful things happen. And we don't tell people how to make that happen, because each faith tradition has its own techniques and its own ways and its own way showers. For us in the West and of the Christian faith, it's Christ as the way shower, but for other people and other faiths, it's other leaders as well. And so the value and the importance is to have that belief in some form of divine connection with us in the physical form, in, again, a non-judgmental and unifying way, and to accept that and to allow others that same freedom. And of course, that's the basis upon which our whole country is based.
Yes, it is, and to respect that belief as much as we respect our own, and to respect the right and privilege of another person to differ from us. And when two people differ totally and still respect each other, then there's not dissonance, there's not a terrible problem being manifest. It's just that two people are working through to see where the other's coming from, and when that happens in that fashion, then almost without fail, there's not a great controversy, there's not harsh feelings exuded. It's just that people are working through. And I love it when people disagree with me honestly, and then we have a discussion about it, because then you learn so much. And also the other person learns a great deal too, regardless of who's right or who's wrong. And very often it's not a matter of one person is right and one is wrong. It's just that there's a different perception being manifested, and there's a difference of opinion being stated. And the courage to be free is to allow the other person to do all the above and still like and respect them. Isn't it?
Absolutely, and that's a wonderful way to sum up exactly what this whole program has been about. And we hope that you found all of the information that we've shared with you to be interesting and useful, and we look forward to seeing you next time.
Mike and Iris would like to extend a cordial invitation for you to join them this Sunday morning at 11 a.m. for our weekly celebration service at the beautiful Seaport Marina Hotel at the corner of Pacific Coast Highway and 2nd Street, adjacent to the Marina Pacifica and Marketplace shopping centers. There will be a guided meditation, prayers, spirited music, and a dynamic, life-changing New Thought message. Please join us this Sunday. You will be warmly welcomed into the company of like-minded, positive, and uplifting people. And remember, whatever your dream, whatever your vision, you can attain it through confident living.